This is my ranking of the best WW1 games I've played, based purely on my personal experience. Each game is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how authentic the setting feels, how well the combat captures the era, and how memorable the overall experience is. Let's get straight into the list. Verdun is one of those WW1 games that really tries to feel different, and I actually respect that a lot. When I played it, what stood out to me was how raw and unforgiving everything feels, especially in the trenches where fights can end in a single shot. It doesn't try to be cinematic or flashy, and instead puts you right into slow, tense combat where positioning and teamwork matter more than anything. I like those close moments where you're struggling to aim while someone is rushing toward you. It creates real pressure, but at the same time, I can't ignore that the game feels rough in many areas. The visuals are pretty dull, animations aren't great, and performance issues can get in the way. Also, if you're playing alone, it can feel frustrating rather than immersive. Still, I'd place this one in the great tier for its unique approach and those intense trench moments. Toy Soldiers HD is something I remember enjoying a lot, and coming back to it now feels a bit mixed for me. The core idea still works really well. You're setting up defenses in this WW1 toy battlefield, placing turrets and upgrading them as waves of enemies keep coming. I like how it mixes strategy with a bit of action, especially when I can take direct control of a turret and handle things myself. That part still feels satisfying and keeps the gameplay engaging. But honestly, the remaster doesn't look that great, and it's hard to ignore that while playing. It feels outdated visually, even with the HD label. Still, the gameplay holds up, and there's enough content with added levels and DLC to keep things interesting. For me, this one lands in the good tier mainly because of its solid and fun gameplay. Battlefield 1 is easily one of the most memorable WW1 experiences I've played. What really stood out to me was how it balances scale and emotion at the same time. On one side, you have massive battles with chaos everywhere, explosions, vehicles, and players all clashing together, and it just feels incredible to be part of that. The weapons feel unique and a bit rough, which actually fits the setting perfectly, and I like how it forces you to play more carefully instead of just spraying bullets. Multiplayer is where I spent most of my time. For me, this belongs in the masterpiece tier because of how well everything comes together into one complete experience. Valiant Hearts: The Great War is one of those experiences that stayed with me long after I finished it. What I really liked is how it doesn't focus on shooting or action, but instead shows the human side of the war through simple storytelling and puzzles. The art style looks like a cartoon at first, but it still manages to show how dark and painful everything is, especially in the trench scenes. I also connected with the characters more than I expected, since their emotions come through even without much dialogue. The puzzles are not very hard, but for me that actually works, because it keeps the story moving without slowing things down. There are also small moments of humor which balance the heavier parts nicely. For me, this clearly belongs in the masterpiece tier because of how powerful and different it feels. Isonzo is one of those shooters that feels much easier to jump into compared to others I've played in this setting. What I noticed right away is how it mixes historical elements with more modern mechanics, so even if you're not into hardcore simulations, you can still have a good time. The battles feel large and chaotic, especially when a lot of players are pushing objectives at the same time, and those moments can be really exciting. I also liked the different classes, especially the officer role where I could call in airstrikes and actually influence the fight in a big way. But at the same time, it doesn't always feel fully immersive, since a lot of systems feel closer to a standard shooter than something deeply authentic. Still, I had a great time playing it, so I'd place this one in the excellent tier for its accessibility and action. The Great War: Western Front is a strategy experience that really surprised me with how detailed and thoughtful it is. What I liked most is how it doesn't try to rush things. Every battle feels slow, heavy, and very tactical, where even a small mistake can cost you a lot. I had moments where my plans worked perfectly, with artillery and timing coming together, and those felt really satisfying. But at the same time, that slow pace can also become frustrating, especially when you're fighting over the same ground again and again without much progress. I also noticed some issues with unit movement and controls, which can make things harder than they need to be. Still, I respect how much effort went into making it feel authentic, even if that comes at the cost of variety. For me, this sits in the excellent tier because of its depth and attention to detail. Last Train Home feels very different from typical war-based strategy titles I've played. what really stood out to me is how much focus it puts on the people instead of just battles. Managing your soldiers on the train, keeping them fed, warm, and mentally stable actually feels just as important as what happens in combat. I liked how every decision matters, like choosing whether to risk sending your team on a mission or saving resources for later, and that constant pressure stays throughout. The tactical missions are interesting too, especially when setting up ambushes, but they can feel a bit clunky at times and rely heavily on pausing. Still, the atmosphere and storytelling kept me invested from start to finish. For me, this lands in the great tier because of its strong emotional focus and unique gameplay mix. Tannenberg is something I went into expecting a more tactical and movement-focused experience compared to similar shooters, and in some ways, it does deliver that. I liked how it encourages teamwork, especially with the squad system and the way you can actually coordinate attacks using the map. It makes you feel like strategy really matters. The large maps and control points also add a nice sense of scale to each match, but when it comes to the actual combat, it doesn't feel as satisfying. The weapons are slow and a bit awkward, which fits the setting, but they also lack impact, and fights can start to feel repetitive after a while. There's also not a lot of variety in what you can do during matches, which makes it lose momentum over time. This fits in the good tier mainly because of its strong tactical ideas, even if the execution feels limited. Beyond the Wire is something I really wanted to like, because on paper it has all the right ideas. The focus on realism, large-scale battles, and teamwork actually sounds great, and when everything lines up, it can create some intense and memorable moments. The gunplay feels heavy and punishing, and the atmosphere really captures the chaos and fear of the battlefield. But the biggest issue is something you can't ignore: the lack of players. Matches often feel empty or incomplete, and that completely breaks the experience since it depends so much on full teams and coordination. It ends up feeling like a great concept that just doesn't work properly in practice. Even though there's clear effort behind it, it's hard to recommend in its current state. So this goes straight into the trash tier mainly because it simply doesn't function the way it's meant to. That's how these World War I games stack up for me, based on how real they feel, how they play, and how much they stayed in my mind after finishing. Thanks for watching.